The little plane lifts off into a grey, freezing sky, flies out over the cold water of the English Channel, and is never seen again. It is the 15th of December 1944. The weather is miserable, low cloud and fog and bitter cold, the kind of day pilots stay on the ground for. But the plane goes anyway, a single-engine aircraft carrying a small handful of men across the Channel toward France. And somewhere over that grey water, it simply disappears. No distress call, no wreckage, no bodies, not then, not ever. The plane and everyone aboard it vanish completely, as though the sea and the sky had swallowed them whole. And aboard that plane, gone in an instant into a mystery that has never been solved, is the most famous musician in America. That is the part that has haunted people for more than 80 years. This was not an anonymous loss in a war full of losses. The man on that plane was, at that moment, arguably the biggest star in the entire country, a household name whose music played in every home, and he disappeared so cleanly and so completely that no one has ever been able to say for certain what happened to him. There was no crash site to examine, no debris to recover, nothing but a plane that took off and never arrived, and a nation that slowly realized its favorite bandleader was simply gone. And here is what makes it more than a mystery. He did not have to be on that plane, or in that war at all. He had been at the very top of American music, wealthy and adored, with every reason to sit the war out in comfort. Instead, at an age when the army did not even want him, he had given it all up, put on a uniform, and crossed the ocean to bring his music to the soldiers doing the fighting, because he thought it might lift them. He doing exactly that, right up to the end. The flight that killed him was a mission to arrange one more concert for the troops. His name was Glenn Miller. If you have ever heard the opening notes of Moonlight Serenade or the swing of In the Mood, you have heard him, because for a few short years in the early 1940s, Glenn Miller was the sound of America. It is all documented in the Army's records, in the account of that final flight. He was real. The music was real, and the mystery of how he vanished over the Channel is real and unsolved to this day. Before we go further, if stories like this one matter to you, please take a moment to subscribe. It genuinely helps us keep the memory of these people alive and reach more people who care about them. Thank you. Now, back to Glenn Miller and to what he gave up to end up on that plane. In the years just before the war, Glenn Miller was on top of the world. His orchestra was the most popular in the country, and his recordings, Moonlight Serenade, In the Mood, Chattanooga Choo Choo, A String of Pearls, were everywhere, on the radio, on jukeboxes, at every dance in America. He had found a sound, a warm, gliding, instantly recognizable sound that people love beyond reason, and it made him rich and famous on a scale few musicians ever reach. He was, by any measure, at the absolute peak of a spectacular career, with nothing to prove and nothing to gain from putting any of it at risk. And then he walked away from it. In 1942, with the country at war, Glenn Miller, at 38, too old to be drafted and under no obligation whatsoever, volunteered for military service. He gave up the tours and the recordings and the enormous income, and he set out to do something specific and, to him, important. To modernize the stiff, old-fashioned music of the military, and to bring the sound that America loved to the men who were far from home and in harm's way. It was not a safe, ceremonial posting he was after. He wanted to be where the soldiers were. The sound had not come easily. For years, Glenn Miller had been a working musician and arranger, good but not famous, chasing a distinctive style that would set his band apart, and failing and trying again. When he finally found it, that warm, gliding blend built around a clarinet singing over the saxophones, it was unmistakable, and it caught the mood of the country exactly. Within a couple of years, he went from a struggling bandleader to the most popular musician in America, his records selling in the millions, his broadcasts drawing enormous audiences. He had chased success for a long time before it came, which may be part of why, when the war gave him a reason to walk away from it, he was willing to. He built something remarkable. The Army Air Forces band that Glenn Miller assembled and led was a large, superb orchestra, and he took it to England and threw it into a punishing schedule of broadcasts and live concerts for the troops. They played hundreds of performances on the radio to men all over the war and in person to vast crowds of servicemen, and the effect was exactly what Miller had hoped. For a soldier a long way from home and frightened and tired, an hour of that familiar, beloved music was a piece of the world he was fighting for, made real again. Miller understood that morale was not a small thing, that music could reach men in a way nothing else could, and he drove himself and his band relentlessly to deliver it. By December of 1944, Paris had been liberated, and Miller planned to take the band there to play for the troops over Christmas. He decided to fly ahead to make the arrangements. On the 15th of December, at an airfield in England in genuinely bad flying weather, he boarded a small single-engine aircraft, a type used for short hops, along with the pilot and one other officer for the flight across the Channel to Paris. It was not a large or dramatic mission. It was the ordinary business of a man getting on with his work. He climbed aboard, the plane took off into the cold grey murk, and that was the last anyone ever saw of Glenn Miller. The pace he set in England was brutal. Miller drove himself and his musicians through an enormous schedule of broadcasts and concerts, sometimes several in a single day, determined to reach as many servicemen as possible in whatever time the war allowed. He was, by all accounts, exhausted and worn thin by the end of 1944, a man in his 40s, pushing himself like someone half his age because he believed the work mattered, and there was never enough time to do all of it. The concert in Paris was meant to be one more push, one more way to reach more men. He would not live to play it. The plane never reached France. When Miller failed to arrive in Paris, and then failed to turn up anywhere at all, the search began, and it found nothing, because there was nothing to find. No wreckage washed ashore. No bodies were recovered. The aircraft and the 3 men aboard it had vanished into the Channel without a trace. And the army eventually had to record the most famous entertainer in the country simply as missing, and then as presumed dead. For his millions of fans, there was no crash to mourn, no grave to visit, only a terrible open-ended absence. In the decades since, people have tried hard to solve it, and there are theories. The most likely, by far, is the simplest and the saddest, that the small plane, flying in dangerous winter weather, went down because of ice or engine failure or the sheer difficulty of the conditions and sank in the cold water. Another theory, drawn from an aircrew's logbook, holds that the plane strayed into a zone where returning Allied bombers dumped their unused bombs into the sea and was destroyed by a falling bomb. There have been wilder stories too, as there always are with a mystery this large, but the honest answer is that no one knows for certain, and almost certainly no one ever will. The Channel kept it secret. For a short time, the army said nothing publicly, hoping against hope. But Miller did not appear in Paris, and his band played the Christmas concert without him, and soon the terrible truth could no longer be held back. And the news went out that Glenn Miller was missing. The country was stunned. In the middle of a war that was killing Americans by the tens of thousands, the loss of one bandleader still landed like a blow to the whole nation, because he had been, in a way, part of the family, the sound in the background of a million ordinary evenings, and now he was simply gone, without even a body to bury. What did not vanish was the music. Glenn Miller was gone, but Moonlight Serenade and In the Mood, and all the rest of it were not. Some of the most instantly recognizable ever, right now, some of the most recognizable music ever recorded. The man who made them disappeared into the sea at 40, at the height of his fame, on his way to play for soldiers, and the sound he created went on without him, carrying his name forward decade after decade to people who were not even born when he was lost. In the years after the war, the legend only grew. His music never left the air. New generations discovered it in a film that introduced him to people who had been Hollywood-toned children when he vanished. The orchestra he built played on under other leaders and still does, carrying the sound and the name into a present he never saw. Few musicians have ever cast so long also, at the very height of Feshido, and fewer still did it while also, the very height of everything, choosing to set it all down and serve. But that is the whole story, and there is a strange, aching completeness to it. Glenn Miller could have had a long, comfortable, famous life. He chose instead to give up his career and go to war, not to fight, but to bring a little beauty and a little home to the men who were fighting, and he was doing exactly that when the Channel took him. He left no grave and no wreckage, only a question that has never been answered, and a body of music that has never stopped playing. Most of us will never know how he died, but we know how he lived, and why he was on that plane, and it is worth remembering both. The greatest bandleader in America, who set down everything to serve the men he could reach the only way he knew how, and who vanished into a grey winter sky, leaving behind a mystery and a sound the world has never let go of.